We are looking at calculations for the NALTA study guide. This is Appendix B calculation. My name is Alice Hogue and I'll be your instructor. So we'll just read this together. Scenario 1 says Andrew owns his land in 100% fee simple. Now when we talk about fee simple, that just means that they own the surface and the minerals. So fee simple means ownership of the surface and the minerals. And then he's got an interest in a 40-acre tract. In a 40-acre tract of land. Now he grants a lease to oil company and he keeps a 1/8 royalty interest. The question is, what are the working interest and net revenue interest of each party in the lease and in the tract? Well, before we get to that, I want to just give you a little bit of a familiarity with terminology. So you're going to hear the term working interest used. The working interest owner is the person who, or the entity that pays the bills. So let's just look at this scenario. This is Andrew and Oil Company before there is an oil and gas lease. Before there's an oil and gas lease, if Andrew wants to drill on his own 40 acres, and he has every right to do so, he will have to pay 100% of the cost of that well, 1 million, 6 million, whatever it is. So Andrew's going to have 100% of the responsibility for paying the bills. So he'll have a 100% working interest. Now, the net revenue interest is usually the cost, it's usually the working interest minus the burdens. And the burdens are things like royalty interest or net royalty interest or overriding royalty interest, non-participating royalty interest. But before there's a lease, Andrew doesn't have any of those burdens. He doesn't have a royalty payment to make. There's no lease. So before the lease, he owns 100% of the net revenue interest and 100% of the working interest. Oil Co. doesn't own anything until there's a lease. So Oil Co.'s working interest before the lease is 0. And after the lease, before the lease, its working interest is 0 and its net revenue interest is 0. But after the lease, what Andrew says is, okay, oil and gas company, I do not want to take the risk of drilling this $6 million well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my 100% working interest. And in exchange, all I want is a share of the production, this 1/8 share of the production. Now, if there's a dry hole, Andrew is out nothing after there's a lease, but before there's a lease, he would have to incur all those costs. So let's look at what happens after the lease. So Andrew, after the lease, he's giving his 100% working interest to Oil Company. So Oil Co. now owns 100%, and Andrew owns 0 of the working interest. He says, okay, Oil Co., you're going to pay all the money. But what he does get is this 1/8 royalty. And what does the oil company get? What is their net revenue interest? Well, remember, their working interest minus their net revenue interest, so minus this 1/8. Now, another way to look at this is you have 1/8 and you're trying to get to 8/8, which is a whole. So their interest is going to be a 7/8 interest. So let's just do a little simple calculation here. This is how you convert this royalty fraction to a decimal. All we're doing is we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. It doesn't feel right. It feels like it should be 8 divided by 1 or 1 divided by 8. Just doesn't seem right. But it is a 0.125 interest. And the interest of the working interest, Oil Co. in this case, is going to be 7 divided by 8. And that's going to be a 0.875 interest. So that's the way it is before the lease and after the lease. Now in this scenario, what they're telling you is in the lease and in the tract. Really the answers are going to be the same for both here, because when they're talking about in the tract, they're saying there might be a unit out there. Well, there's no unit in this fact pattern. That would change their interest in the unit. So let's just look at in the lease. Andrew's working interest is what? Well, who's going to pay the bills? Andrew's not paying any of the bills. Oil company's going to pay for 100% of the bills. What is Andrew's net revenue interest? Well, remember we just said that was his royalty interest. That's this 0.125 here, his 1/8 interest. And what is Oil Co's net revenue interest? And we already said down here, it's 1/8 plus 7/8 is going to be a 0.875. And then we're going to put the same things in here because we don't have a unit yet. So if you are following along in the text, the correct answer is going to be A. Now let's move on to the next scenario. We're just going to add another fact here. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.